Hello everybody and welcome back to Insider's Guide. Today we're continuing our discussion of the biggest ski resort in California, Palisades, Tahoe. With Palisades there's a lot to cover, so this episode is split into 5 parts. In this part, we'll cover the terrain served by the iconic Headwall and Broken Arrow lifts. If you haven't already, go check out part A to get some valuable context to a lot of what I'll say. A huge thank you to Ski TNB for helping us with research and footage of Broken Arrow. If you like what you see, he's got so much more good stuff at the link in the description. So with all that said, let's continue in Insider's Guide to Ski Resorts, Palisades, Tahoe. We'll go ahead and start off in the Broken Arrow pod. Historically, the Broken Arrow terrain was open incredibly infrequently. However, new management has done a really good job of opening this terrain more reliably in recent years. However, while the terrain has been opening, the lift itself still hardly runs. As such, to access the terrain, you have to keep as much speed as you possibly can while taking a groomed traverse from high camp, and even then still may need to hike just a few minutes. The Broken Arrow terrain is extremely unique and very aesthetic, even when compared to other iconic zones on the mountain. However, it mostly faces south and is relatively low on the mountain. As such, you can pretty much expect corn snow conditions here, unless you have an overcast powder day. Broken Arrow is one of those zones that truly isn't done justice by the trail map alone. There is a ridiculous amount of terrain here that takes a lot of exploring to fully comprehend. In the spirit of the zone, I'm not going to go super in-depth with all the lines here, especially the ones in the Squallywood book. I truly feel that what makes this zone so unique is all the adventuring that you have to do to find the cool spots. One last note before we begin our discussion of this terrain. At several other ski resorts, the marked runs here would probably be rated double black rather than single black. Now, the marquee run here is the homonymously named Broken Arrow. This is probably my favorite marked run in the zone. It feels completely isolated from the rest of Palisades, and there's just so much variety packed into this one run. Also, in stark contrast to the rest of the Broken Arrow terrain, at least the first part of this run faces somewhat north, which preserves the snow quality. The initial drop-in is steep and often corniced, but then you have a nicely pitched wide open bowl with tons of features to explore. There is a bit of a flat section at the bottom of the bowl before the run turns south and joins the same face that the other Broken Arrow runs flow into. Ski down towards the Funatel to access Tower 16, a fully south-facing run that often develops some really deep bumps, but is far from the gnarliest line around. For me, this run is best in April when the snowpack is deep and temperatures start to warm up. If you're looking for some actual features, you can cut skiers left towards Tower 12 Cliffs, which offers a series of small but fun drops and chutes. Akcha Cache pockets and Summer Road pockets are also part of this wider Tower 16 area, but have a few rocks scattered about. Swell and Powerline Face are located further down this zone, and due to their south-facing aspect coupled with the even lower elevation, I don't particularly recommend them. Overall, Broken Arrow is generally a tame pod when strictly looking at the trail map, but there is some serious, jarringly difficult unmarked terrain here. In general, there are 2 main zones home to the most extreme terrain in Broken Arrow. The first is known as the Funatel Knob, which is this huge cliff face sandwiched in between Tower 16 and Broken Arrow. Do not go here unless you truly know what you're doing. This is a seriously gnarly zone, home to some of the most ridiculous lines at the entire resort. As the name implies, you'll get a somewhat okay view of this cliff area from the right-hand side window of the Funatel, so I'd recommend riding it to study your line beforehand. The second unmarked zone is accessed by traversing high skiers left from the Broken Arrow run to access these cliffs depicted on the trail map. You will have to do a short but steep hike to access the runs in this zone, but it's well worth it. The only line here I'm comfortable talking about is Dead Man's, which is an awesome tight chute that requires a straight line towards the end. It's such an aesthetic little shot that you've probably seen in several videos featuring Broken Arrow's terrain. There are, of course, a plethora of other unmarked chutes and cliffs, but I will leave those for you to explore. All the Broken Arrow terrain will funnel you back to the base of the mountain, which does mean that this terrain does take a bit more work to lap. As we mentioned earlier, in most cases, the Broken Arrow lift will not be running, and so the most convenient way to lap the terrain is, rather surprisingly, via the tram. You can technically lap the terrain via the other 2 out-of-base options linked with Big Blue, but the tram is much more direct. Let's now shift gears and make our way over to the other main mid-mountain pod at the resort, Headwall. Headwall is a strong contender for my personal favorite lift at Palisades, Tahoe. The lift offers several flavors of high alpine terrain, from wide open bowls to extremely steep chutes and straight lines. Operationally, Headwall is one of the most variable lifts on the mountain. In the early season, the Headwall lift rarely spins. However, once the resort opens the upper mountain, the Headwall terrain is usually accessible via the reverse traverse from Siberia. The reverse traverse is essentially Newport, but going in the opposite direction, and is only open when the Headwall lift is closed. It does require a fair bit of sidestepping, but allows the terrain to still be accessible even when the lift is not spinning. Via the reverse traverse, the Headwall terrain becomes a 2-lift lap. You have to ski all the way down to the base, take one of that trio up to Siberia, and then take Siberia up to get back to the start of the traverse. I'd recommend using Washishu specifically because it's the most direct and you don't have to take off your skis. Closer to Christmas, the Headwall lift usually opens to account for the holiday crowd. However, it is a very exposed lift and often goes down for high winds even when other lifts stay open. Very late in the season, the Headwall lift will close, but the terrain will be accessible from, you guessed it, the reverse traverse. It usually stays accessible until there's not enough snow to keep the egress out open. Okay, with that out of the way, let's dive into the terrain itself. Newport is shown poorly on the map, but starts at the top of Headwall and makes a big right-hand turn all the way through where the words Chicken Bowl are on the map here. This is the only way down Headwall that is suitable for intermediates. Chicken Bowl is essentially the off-piste accessed directly off the skier's right of Newport. In between Chicken Bowl and North Bowl are a series of 3 lines known as the garbage chutes. They require a 1-minute walk from the top of the Headwall lift to access, and, because they're somewhat hidden, they rarely see serious traffic. These lines are decently steep, but get nicely filled in as the season progresses. When unloading the Headwall lift, you can take a left to head to Sun Bowl, a wide open area that gets some serious sun exposure, just as the name implies. Thus, when conditions are firm elsewhere, this is a great place to be. At the bottom of the bowl there's a clear rope that prevents you from going out of bounds and marks the last point that you can reasonably traverse to get back onto C2 Ridge. However, I'd recommend starting your traverse even before this, both for better snow coverage and for ease. Back up above the bowl, C2 Ridge is a very narrow groomed road that allows you to access the bulk of the Headwall terrain. You access it by making a U-turn to the left after unloading Headwall. It can get quite congested and loses snow coverage fast in the late season. Make your way down C2 Ridge and cut skiers left as soon as you can to access North Bowl, a steep, wide open bowl that can get pretty bumped up. North Bowl has several different areas within it. The middle of the bowl is the easiest, although it can be corniced. The top of the skier's left will require a bit of sidestepping, but often holds very nice snow and is a bit steeper than the main part of the bowl. Skier's right is home to the North Bowl chutes, which are a series of fun straight lines that get harder as you travel further down the ridge. These chutes are my personal favorite ways to enter North Bowl. Note that it is possible to get to the Gold Coast lift from North Bowl, but it requires a bit of uphill catwalking. Hogsback and Headwall Face are both wide open bumped up bowl areas that are some of the most popular runs in the pod. Hogsback typically sees a bit less traffic than Headwall Face, so I'd recommend heading skiers left towards it if Headwall Face itself is busy. There is also an insane cliff area between Headwall Face and the slot that requires a lot of snow to fill in. If you continue down C2 Ridge past those 2 runs, there is yet another entrance on the left, this one to the slot. Note that this entrance is very rocky, and, more often than not, you'll be required to take your skis off to walk to the drop-in. The top of the slot requires a cornice drop into a very steep bowl. This first part can be very rocky, but once you clear this, it's usually home to some very nice wind-blown snow. If the slot isn't spicy enough for you, then take that same entrance as if heading to slot, but head down the skier's right ridge to access Light Towers, arguably the most extreme zone found off Headwall. Light Towers doesn't look too intimidating from the lift, but don't let that deceive you. This is an incredibly steep zone. Unless there's been a big storm, the snow quality here is very poor, which makes these lines incredibly dangerous to attempt on such days. There are about 9 different lines through this zone, the easiest of which is aptly named Easy In. Easy In is located in the middle of the zone. In addition to those 9 main lines, there are several variations to enter into Sun Chute, an hourglass chute located towards the skier's right end of the ridge. Other notable lines here include Arc Chute and Blizzard Line, which are more challenging than the aforementioned chutes. Just below Light Towers is the Cornice II terrain, which is named after the old chair that used to run in between Cornice Bowl and Light Towers. This is a really fun cirque that's home to a bunch of chutes and cliffs. There are 2 main ways to access this terrain. Taking Slot or Light Towers first, and then cutting skiers right is my favorite way. You could also continue down C2 Ridge and then do a bit of uphill sidestepping up and over to get to it. That second option is actually the most common way, although it's not my favorite because it's hard to see where you end up due to a bit of a blind rollover.
Okay.
This becomes less and less of an issue with repeat laps, however. The marquee run here, Cornice Bowl, was groomed frequently back in the day, but this isn't really the case anymore. Nonetheless, it's still pretty much the easiest way. Past Cornice Bowl, you'll arrive at a trio of 3 chutes. From lookers right to left, they are Classic, Hourglass, and Needle. Hourglass is the widest and easiest, Classic is the most aesthetic, and Needle is the narrowest and most challenging. All 3 of these lines are exceptional and are worth doing individually. In addition, the cliffs that make up the left and right walls of Classic and Hourglass are home to several absolutely insane lines that require cliff drops and straight lining. Past Needle are a series of unmarked lines known as the tree chutes. They're not as tight as Needle, but just about as steep. The terrain beyond the tree chutes is known as horse trails, which is the most mellow run in the entire C2 area. All the runs in C2 filter onto this very flat area underneath the cirque, so try to keep some speed at the bottom. The most common way to exit C2 is via Jagged Edge, but I personally like to head past Adrenaline Rock and ski the lower half of the Sisters, which is this cliff band here. We'll talk more about these 2 zones in just a moment. Bullet is the natural extension of C2 Ridge and flows right in between the Sisters and Adrenaline Rock. It is infrequently groomed, so be sure to check the grooming report in advance. All of the terrain I'm going to talk about now is all technically part of the Enchanted Forest Zone, although it doesn't appear like that on the trail map. Go a bit past the Horse Trails entrance and ski straight down to access Adrenaline Rock. There are several lines in this huge cliff face, but the main line here is the infamous Adrenaline Chute, a very steep straight line that often has a mandatory exit air. As the snowpack continues to build, the exit air can gradually disappear in better seasons. While this chute does take a bit of work to find, it's one of the coolest runs on this part of the mountain. Cut skiers right from the middle of Bullet, just before the run starts to head towards Adrenaline Rock, to access the Sisters, a series of 4 chutes that all require several mandatory drops and straight lines. Past Bullet is the Enchanted Forest proper, which is lightly graded and has a few gnarly cliff areas if you know where to look. All of the headwall terrain filters onto a brief, albeit congested, section of Mountain Run which you can take back to the lift for another ride up. This whole area on the map may look small, but as you've just heard, it packs a serious punch. Well, that's about it for Broken Arrow and Headwall. Go check out the remaining parts now, all about the rest of the mountain. As always, please leave any questions down below. If you enjoyed this video or found it helpful, please consider subscribing to help support this dream. Thank you all so much for watching. All my love, I'm out.